Lucas Oliveira has always looked up to the stars with wonder. Born into poverty, he carries a burning dream to become an astronaut, a promise he made to his hardworking mother who raised him alone. When he earns a scholarship to the prestigious Vanguard Space Academy, his path to the stars seems closer than ever. But the academy holds more than just academic challenges. Lucas faces relentless prejudice from privileged classmates who seek to tear him down. Guided by an unlikely mentor, the reclusive Dr. Enrique Vargas, Lucas's journey becomes one of self-discovery and perseverance. Along the way, a shocking revelation about his father's erased legacy pushes Lucas to fight for both his dream and his family's honor. With everything on the line, Lucas must rise above the weight of racism and adversity to prove he belongs among the stars and fulfill a promise that could change the course of space exploration forever. Beyond the Stars is a moving and emotionally charged tale of resilience, hope, and the courage to overcome the impossible. Lucas Oliveira, a young black man from a humble background, has always dreamed of being an astronaut. Raised by his mother, who works as a cleaner at a space research institute, Lucas grew up admiring the stars and the scientists who study them. With a lot of effort and dedication, he earns a scholarship to study at a prestigious astronaut school, where the elite of future space explorers are trained. However, upon arriving at school, Lucas faces prejudice and constant humiliation from his classmates, who look down on him because of his color and social status. Determined to overcome adversity, Lucas finds an unlikely mentor, the reclusive and bitter Professor Dr. Enrique Vargas, a former astronaut who carries a painful secret about his last space mission. As Lucas faces academic challenges and racism from his classmates, he also discovers that the school is about to launch a high-risk experimental mission, and he will have the chance to prove his worth. What no one knows is that Lucas carries within himself a unique and innate talent that may be the key to the success of this mission. In the end, a surprising twist occurs when Lucas discovers that his father, a man he never knew, was a pioneering astronaut whose story was erased due to institutional racism. This discovery gives Lucas the strength and determination to overcome all barriers and finally realize his dream of traveling to space, leaving behind a legacy of courage and determination for future generations. Emotional hook. Lucas's fight is not only for his dream, but for the dignity and recognition of his identity and heritage. His journey reveals the deep scars of racism, both present and past, but also the immense strength that lies in hope and love for a seemingly impossible dream. Compelling reason. Lucas's determination to become an astronaut is driven by the promise he made to his mother that he would one day take her to see the stars up close. This promise is what keeps him steadfast, even in the face of the greatest adversity, and what guides him in his search for justice and personal fulfillment. Lucas Oliveira has always looked up to the stars with wonder and hope. Growing up in a poor neighborhood, he dreamed of becoming an astronaut, an ambition fueled by the stories his mother, a cleaner at a space institute, told him about the wonders of the universe. Against all odds, Lucas wins a scholarship to the prestigious Vanguard Space Academy, where the best and brightest are trained to explore the cosmos. But what should have been the beginning of his journey to the stars turns into a nightmare. Lucas faces constant humiliation and prejudice from his peers, who despise him for his skin color and humble background. As he struggles to stand his ground amidst a hostile environment, Lucas finds unexpected support in the reclusive and mysterious Dr. Enrique Vargas, a former astronaut whose career was cut short by a tragedy he never got over. When the Academy announces an experimental mission that could change the course of space exploration, Lucas sees his chance to prove that he is more than the labels they have imposed on him. But a shocking discovery about his own past threatens to shake his convictions. His father, a man he never knew, was a pioneering astronaut whose story was deliberately erased due to institutional racism. Now, with his father's memory as his guide and the promise he made to his mother to one day take her to see the stars, Lucas embarks on a journey of overcoming, resilience, and justice. He is about to face the greatest challenge of his life, where the risk is as high as the reward. The right to achieve the impossible and leave a legacy that will never be forgotten. Beyond the Stars is a moving story of hope, courage, and the relentless fight for a dream, which defies prejudice and inspires everyone to look to the sky and believe in the power of determination. Physical description. a 19-year-old young black man with a lean and athletic build. He has short, tightly coiled hair and deep brown eyes that reflect his determination. Lucas often wears simple, practical clothing, a reminder of his modest upbringing. Backstory: raised by a single mother in a poor neighborhood, Lucas developed an early fascination with space by spending time at the institute where his mother worked. Despite the challenges of growing up in a tough environment, Lucas excelled academically, earning a scholarship to the prestigious Vanguard Space Academy. His dream of becoming an astronaut is driven by a promise he made to his mother and his longing to connect with the father he never knew. Physical description: a man in his late 50s, Dr. Vargas has a tall, wiry frame with graying hair and a gaunt face lined with the marks of past sorrows. His eyes are sharp and observant, yet shadowed by regret. He often dresses in rumpled academic attire, reflecting his disinterest in outward appearances. Backstory: once a celebrated astronaut, Dr. Vargas's career ended abruptly after a failed mission that claimed the lives of his crew. Haunted by guilt and loss, he retreated into a life of solitude and academia. Now a professor at the Vanguard Space Academy, he is drawn to Lucas, seeing in him a reflection of the potential and passion he once had. Physical description: a woman in her mid-40s, Anna is petite and slightly stooped from years of hard work. Her dark hair is streaked with gray, usually tied back in a simple bun. Her hands are calloused, and her eyes, though tired, are full of warmth and love for her son. Backstory: Anna has worked as a janitor at the Space Research Institute for most of her life, raising Lucas on her own after his father disappeared. Despite her struggles, she instilled in Lucas a love for learning and the belief that he could achieve anything. Her greatest wish is to see her son reach the stars. Physical description: a 20-year-old white man with a muscular build and chiseled features, Adrian is the epitome of privilege. He has sandy blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and a smug, confident smile. He wears the latest fashion, favoring designer clothing that emphasizes his wealth and status. Backstory: the son of a wealthy and influential politician, Adrian has lived a life of luxury and entitlement. He was accepted into Vanguard Space Academy more due to his family's connections than his abilities. Adrian sees Lucas as an unworthy competitor and frequently bullies him, using both his social status and physical strength to assert dominance. Physical description: a 19-year-old white woman with a slender build, fair skin, and bright green eyes. Emily has long auburn hair that she often wears in a braid. She has a natural beauty that she downplays with minimal makeup and modest clothing. Backstory: Emily comes from a middle-class background and earned her place at Vanguard Space Academy through hard work and intelligence. She is empathetic and kind, often questioning the prejudices and arrogance of her peers. Emily becomes one of Lucas's few friends at the academy, supporting him through his struggles and standing up to those who bully him. Description: an elite institution located in a sprawling, futuristic campus surrounded by forests and mountains. The academy features state-of-the-art training facilities, including simulation chambers, zero-gravity environments, and advanced spacecraft prototypes. The atmosphere is highly competitive, with students vying for limited spots in upcoming space missions. The sleek, modern architecture reflects the cutting-edge nature of the academy, but also its cold, unforgiving environment where only the best can thrive. Description: a densely packed, working-class area on the outskirts of the city. The neighborhood is filled with small, worn-down apartment buildings and narrow streets lined with street vendors and local shops. The community is close-knit but struggling, with limited access to resources and opportunities. Despite the hardships, there's a sense of resilience among the residents, and Lucas's small apartment, though modest, is filled with warmth and the memories of his upbringing. Description: a large, government-funded facility located near the city, where advanced space research and development take place. The institute is a mix of modern laboratories, testing areas, and office spaces, with a large observatory at its center. Ana Oliveira works here as a janitor, cleaning the halls where groundbreaking discoveries are made. The institute is a place of inspiration for Lucas, where he spent many hours as a child, dreaming of one day working there as an astronaut. Setting: Lucas's apartment. Summary: Lucas receives a heartfelt farewell from his mother, Anna, before heading to Vanguard Space Academy. Anna gives him a photograph of his father, urging him to follow his dreams and make her proud. Setting: Vanguard Space Academy's entrance and main hall. Summary: Lucas enters the prestigious academy, feeling both awe and alienation as he navigates the elite atmosphere. His first encounter with Adrian Price sets the stage for their rivalry. Setting: Lecture Hall. Summary: Lucas attends his first lecture, delivered by Dr. Enrique Vargas. Adrian taunts Lucas during the class, but Lucas chooses to stay focused. Dr. Vargas seems to take a special interest in Lucas. Setting: Cafeteria. Summary: Lucas, feeling isolated, is approached by Emily Brooks, who befriends him. She offers him encouragement, and their connection starts to grow. Setting: Training facility. Summary: Lucas impresses in the physical training, despite being sabotaged by Adrian. Dr. Vargas offers Lucas subtle words of encouragement, sparking the beginning of a mentor-student relationship. Lucas's dorm room. Lucas reflects on his first day, the weight of his new environment, and the challenges ahead. His determination to succeed grows stronger. Flight simulator training room. Lucas competes against Adrian in a high-pressure simulation. Despite Adrian's attempts to throw him off, Lucas performs well, earning the grudging respect of some peers. Dr. Vargas's office. Dr. Vargas invites Lucas to his office and shares stories from his past, offering Lucas mentorship. Vargas recognizes something special in Lucas and subtly encourages him to pursue his dreams despite the obstacles. Classroom and training sessions. The demands of the academy begin to intensify. Lucas excels in academics but struggles to maintain a balance with his physical training. The pressure is building, and he feels increasingly isolated. Academy Library. Lucas stumbles upon archives related to his father's past and begins investigating his father's connection to the academy. This sets the stage for his obsession with uncovering the truth. Archives at the academy. Lucas continues to dig through academy records, growing more determined to uncover the truth about his father's involvement in the space program. He suspects a cover-up. Training facility. Adrian escalates his bullying, targeting Lucas during a team exercise. Lucas stays focused, determined not to let Adrian's provocations derail his progress. Dr. Vargas's office. Lucas confronts Dr. Vargas about what he's discovered in the archives. Vargas reveals that Lucas's father was indeed involved in the space program, but his legacy was buried due to systemic racism. Cafeteria and common areas. Lucas becomes consumed with finding out the full story about his father, isolating himself from other students, including Emily, who worries about him. The tension between Lucas and Adrian reaches new heights. Space Research Institute archives. Lucas and Dr. Vargas unearth definitive evidence that Lucas's father was a key figure in a groundbreaking space mission, but his achievements were erased from the Academy's history due to racial prejudice. Training Center. The Academy administers a particularly grueling physical and mental test. Lucas pushes himself to the limit, motivated by both his personal ambition and the desire to honor his father's legacy. Training exercise. Adrian devises a plan to humiliate Lucas during a critical exercise. However, the plan backfires when Lucas outperforms everyone, gaining the respect of a few reluctant classmates. Academy Courtyard. Emily confronts Lucas, worried that his obsession with uncovering his father's past is consuming him. She urges him to focus on his future and not let the past define him. Dr. Vargas's office. Dr. Vargas finally reveals the full story. He was complicit in covering up Lucas's father's achievements. This revelation devastates Lucas, but also provides clarity about the obstacles he faces. Lucas's dorm room. Lucas must decide whether to continue chasing the past or focus on becoming the best astronaut he can be. He chooses to pursue both goals, determined to restore his father's legacy while forging his own path. Flight simulator. Lucas faces the Academy's final challenge, a high-pressure simulated space mission. He performs exceptionally well, demonstrating leadership and skill under pressure. Academy testing grounds. Adrian, desperate to sabotage Lucas one last time, makes a critical error during the final test, leading to his expulsion from the Academy. Lucas finally overcomes his biggest rival. Academy Gardens. After Adrian's departure, Lucas and Emily reconcile. She expresses her admiration for his perseverance, and their bond grows stronger as they prepare for the next phase of their journey. Dr. Vargas takes Lucas's father's story to the authorities, ensuring that the truth about his contributions to space exploration will finally be revealed. Lucas feels a sense of closure, but knows his journey isn't over. Space Research Institute launch site. Summary. The chapter ends with Lucas preparing for his first space mission. He shares a final moment with his mother, Anna, fulfilling his promise to take her to the stars. Summary. Lucas finally achieves his dream of becoming an astronaut. As the spacecraft launches, he reflects on his journey and the obstacles he overcame to get here. Lucas and his team face unexpected challenges during the mission. Lucas takes the lead, using everything he's learned to help resolve the crisis and ensure the mission's success. Lucas gazes at Earth from space, a moment of awe and personal fulfillment. He calls his mother from space, sharing the view with her and bringing their emotional journey full circle. Space Research Institute press conference. Dr. Vargas reveals the truth about Lucas's father's contributions to space exploration, restoring his legacy. Lucas's family name is honored, and Lucas feels the weight of history lift from his shoulders. Setting: Space Research Institute landing site. Summary: Lucas returns from space as a hero. His mother, Emily, and Dr. Vargas are there to greet him. He reflects on his journey, knowing that he has fulfilled both his dream and his father's legacy. The morning sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of Lucas Oliveira's small apartment, casting a golden glow over the worn kitchen table. Lucas sat in silence, his hands clasped together, his thoughts racing. Today was the day. He glanced over at his mother, Anna, who stood by the stove, preparing their modest breakfast. The smell of coffee filled the air, mingling with the soft hum of the radio playing in the background. Anna turned toward him, her face etched with both pride and worry. "You ready for this, meu filho?" she asked, her voice soft yet firm. Lucas nodded, though the knot in his stomach told a different story. "I am," he replied, though he wasn't entirely sure. She walked over, placing a cup of coffee in front of him before pulling out an old, worn photograph from her apron pocket. She placed it gently on the table. It was a picture of his father, a man Lucas had never met but had often wondered about. The resemblance was uncanny. Same sharp eyes, same determined expression. "He'd be proud of you," Anna whispered, her voice catching slightly. "And you remember the promise you made to me?" Lucas nodded, his throat tight. "I'll take you to the stars one day." "That's right." She placed her hand over his. "No matter what they say, no matter what happens, you hold on to that dream, Lucas." With a final hug, Anna sent Lucas off with his packed bag and a heart full of hopes and fears. As he walked toward the bus stop, the weight of that promise felt heavier than ever. The towering gates of the Vanguard Space Academy loomed in front of him, sleek and imposing against the backdrop of a clear blue sky. Lucas stood for a moment, taking it all in. The futuristic buildings, the students moving about in crisp uniforms, the buzzing energy of a place that felt a world apart from the life he had known. He swallowed hard and walked through the gates, his bag slung over his shoulder. Eyes followed him, some curious, others indifferent, but a few filled with disdain. He didn't have to guess why. His simple clothes stood out among the designer jackets and spotless shoes of his fellow students. As he made his way to the main hall, he overheard a voice, dripping with arrogance. Lucas turned to see a tall, muscular young man with sandy blonde hair and piercing blue eyes, a perfect embodiment of wealth and privilege. Adrian Price. Lucas had seen him on the Academy's website, smiling for the cameras as if the world was his playground. "No," Lucas replied calmly, meeting Adrian's gaze. "I'm right where I need to be." Adrian smirked, looking Lucas up and down. "Good luck then. You'll need it." As Adrian walked away with his entourage of equally smug friends, Lucas felt the first sting of the battles he would face here. But he kept moving, his mother's words echoing in his mind. The lecture hall buzzed with excitement as students filed in, taking their seats for the first class of the term. Lucas sat near the back, his fingers tapping nervously on the desk. He had always excelled in academics, but this was different. He was no longer the top student in his small neighborhood school. Here, he was just one among many, and the stakes were higher than ever. The doors swung open, and a hush fell over the room as Dr. Enrique Vargas entered. He was taller than Lucas had expected, with a gaunt, weathered face and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of distant memories. Dr. Vargas began the lecture with a stern, no-nonsense tone, outlining the rigorous training ahead. "Space doesn't care where you come from. It only cares if you're prepared," he said, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on Lucas for a brief moment. There was something in that look, recognition, maybe even understanding. "Of course, not everyone is prepared," Adrian's voice rang out from the front row, loud enough for the whole class to hear. His eyes flickered toward Lucas, the implication clear. Some students snickered. Lucas felt his pulse quicken, but he kept his focus on Dr. Vargas, refusing to let the insults stick. Dr. Vargas continued, unaffected, though his sharp eyes didn't miss the exchange. The class went on, and as Lucas left the lecture hall, he could feel the weight of eyes on him, judging, calculating. But he pushed it aside. He had made it this far. He wasn't about to let them break him. Lucas wandered into the academy cafeteria, the smell of food making his stomach growl. The place was packed with students, but as he moved through the crowd with his tray, it became clear that finding a place to sit wouldn't be easy. The tables were filled with groups, and though there were empty chairs, none seemed particularly welcoming. As he stood there, awkwardly scanning the room, a soft voice called out, "Hey, you can sit here." Lucas turned to see a girl with long auburn hair and bright green eyes waving him over. Emily Brooks, another face from the Academy website, a top student with a reputation for being kind but quiet. He smiled, relieved, and took the seat across from her. "Thanks," he said. "No problem. First days are always tough." She smiled, and for the first time that day, Lucas felt a small sense of ease. As they ate, Emily talked about her own experiences coming from a middle-class family and how she had to work hard to get here, just like Lucas. She didn't ask about his background, didn't pry. She simply treated him like a fellow student, an equal. It was refreshing. Later that day, the students gathered at the Academy's state-of-the-art training facility for their first physical session. The air was thick with nervous anticipation as instructors explained the drills they would be put through: endurance tests, zero-gravity simulations, and teamwork exercises. Lucas stood among the crowd, mentally preparing himself. Physical training had never been his strong suit, but he was determined to give it his all. The first test was a grueling obstacle course, designed to push each student to their limits. Lucas pushed himself harder than he ever had before, his muscles screaming in protest. Despite the pain, he kept going, finishing the course with a respectable time. He could feel the eyes on him, some impressed, others waiting for him to fail. As they moved on to the teamwork exercise, Lucas was paired with Adrian and a few others. It didn't take long for Adrian to start sabotaging him, subtly throwing Lucas off balance and making him look incompetent in front of the instructors. By the end of the session, Lucas was frustrated, but he kept his composure. As they filed out of the facility, Dr. Vargas approached Lucas, his expression unreadable. "Not bad," he said, his voice low. "But you'll need to be better than not bad if you want to make it here." Lucas nodded, the weight of the words sinking in. He knew he couldn't afford to just survive. He had to thrive. As the day came to a close, Lucas returned to his dorm, exhausted but resolute. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the photo of his father. "I'm going to make it," he whispered. "For you. For Mom. For me." The silence of Lucas's dorm room was a stark contrast to the noise and energy of the academy. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the empty space around him. The walls were plain, save for the one item that made it feel like home: the photograph of his father that his mother had given him that morning. He placed it on his desk, next to his textbooks and notes, as if the picture could somehow ground him in this new world. The day had been grueling, mentally and physically. The stares, the whispers, Adrian's smug comments, all of it had left Lucas with a heavy sense of isolation. Yet, as he looked at his father's image, a new sense of determination began to build inside him. His mother's words echoed in his mind. Hold on to that dream. His resolve grew stronger as he lay down, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow was a new day, and there was no turning back. He was going to prove to them all that he belonged. The following morning, the students gathered at the flight simulation room, the buzz of excitement and nervous energy filling the air. Lucas stood in line, watching as others entered the simulator pods, testing their skills in various scenarios. His turn came. Stepping into the pod, Lucas strapped himself in, his heart pounding. The console lit up in front of him as the virtual stars flickered on the screen. His hands hovered over the controls, remembering the many hours he'd spent studying flight mechanics and space navigation. This was his chance to prove he could handle the pressure. The simulation began, and Lucas's focus narrowed to the task at hand. His fingers moved swiftly across the controls, adjusting for turbulence, navigating obstacles, and ensuring the safety of the simulated crew. His heart raced, but his mind remained sharp, recalling every piece of training he had absorbed. Halfway through, Lucas noticed a glitch in the simulation. A minor issue, but enough to throw him off if he wasn't careful. As he worked to stabilize the pod, a sudden shake jostled him, and the system announced a critical failure. Lucas's fingers tightened on the controls, instinctively pulling the pod into a recovery maneuver. Sweat trickled down his forehead, but he managed to pull the simulation back on course just in time for the mission to end. When the simulation finished, Lucas exited the pod, his breaths coming fast. A few students glanced his way, murmuring among themselves. Adrian, who had been watching the entire time, approached him with a smug grin. "Not bad," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "But let's see how long you can keep it up." Lucas said nothing, keeping his expression calm, though he could feel the tension bubbling inside him. He'd done well, but he knew it wouldn't be enough for people like Adrian. Yet, the grudging respect in some of the other students' eyes told Lucas that, slowly but surely, he was starting to make his mark. Later that afternoon, Lucas received an unexpected invitation to Dr. Enrique Vargas's office. As he made his way through the academy halls, his thoughts raced. Why would Dr. Vargas want to see him? He hadn't exactly stood out in class. Not yet, at least. Lucas knocked on the door, and a low, gravelly voice answered, "Come in." Dr. Vargas's office was as sparse and no-nonsense as the man himself. Books lined the walls, most of them focused on space exploration and physics. The professor sat behind a large desk, his hands folded, his sharp eyes studying Lucas as he entered. "Sit down," Dr. Vargas said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. Lucas complied, unsure of what to expect. Dr. Vargas leaned back in his chair, his gaze still fixed on Lucas. "You handled the simulator well today," Vargas said. His tone was measured, almost cold. "But you have more potential than you realize." Lucas blinked, surprised by the compliment. "Thank you, sir." Vargas steepled his fingers. "I've been watching you, Oliveira. You've got the technical skills, but there's more to becoming an astronaut than knowledge. You'll need resilience. This academy will push you to your limits, both physically and mentally. The question is, are you ready to face that?" Lucas's throat tightened. He wanted to say yes, but the weight of the professor's words settled heavily on his shoulders. "I am," he said, though his voice wavered slightly. Dr. Vargas's expression didn't change. "Good. Because I'm offering you an opportunity. Extra training. Guidance. You'll need it if you're going to survive here." Lucas hesitated for a moment, unsure if there was a catch. "Why me?" he asked. Vargas's eyes darkened, his expression unreadable. "Because I see something in you. Something I once saw in myself." Lucas felt a flicker of understanding. Dr. Vargas wasn't just offering mentorship. He was looking for redemption, both for himself and for Lucas. "I'll do it," Lucas said, his voice steady now. Dr. Vargas nodded, satisfied. "Then let's begin." Over the next few days, the demands of the academy intensified. Lucas found himself juggling the rigorous physical training sessions with the advanced coursework that seemed designed to overwhelm even the brightest students. The physical drills pushed him to his limits, testing his endurance and strength in ways he had never experienced before. More than once, Lucas found himself gasping for breath, his muscles screaming in protest as he pushed through each obstacle. The academic challenges were no less grueling. Complex equations, simulations, and theoretical models piled up, leaving him with little time to rest. And through it all, Adrian continued to undermine him at every opportunity. Whether it was a subtle remark during class or an intentional shove during training, Adrian never let Lucas forget that he was seen as an outsider. "Keep up, Oliveira," Adrian sneered during a particularly brutal endurance test. "We wouldn't want you falling behind now, would we?" Lucas ignored him, focusing instead on keeping his pace. He was determined not to let Adrian get to him, not when he had come this far. But the isolation weighed heavily on him. Outside of Emily's occasional encouragement, Lucas had few allies at the academy. Most of the students kept their distance, and those who didn't were too intimidated by Adrian's influence to offer any real friendship. Still, Lucas pressed on, reminding himself of the promise he had made to his mother and the guidance Dr. Vargas had offered. He couldn't afford to let the pressure break him. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of training, Lucas found himself wandering the halls of the academy's library. The quiet space offered a reprieve from the constant demands of his schedule, and Lucas often came here to study or clear his mind. As he browsed the shelves, his eyes landed on a section of old records, documents detailing past missions and historical data from the Academy's early days. Curiosity piqued, Lucas pulled one of the files from the shelf and began flipping through it. His heart skipped a beat when he saw a name that stopped him cold. Leonardo Oliveira. Lucas's hands trembled as he read the brief description. His father had been a part of a space mission. But that couldn't be right. He had never known anything about his father's involvement with the Academy. His mother had told him only that his father had left when Lucas was young. Flipping through the pages, Lucas's mind raced. Why had his father's name never been mentioned? What had happened? The more Lucas read, the more questions arose, and a sense of urgency began to build within him. There was something here, something hidden, and he needed to find out the truth. He tucked the file under his arm, determined to follow this mystery wherever it led. The dim light of the Academy archives cast long shadows as Lucas sat hunched over a desk, files and papers strewn before him. His heart raced as he flipped through page after page, each one revealing a small fragment of a story that had been buried. The name Leonardo Oliveira appeared again and again. His father. It felt surreal to see it in official Academy documents. All his life, his father had been a mystery, a ghost. But here he was, buried in the Academy's history. Lucas leaned back in his chair, the weight of this discovery pressing down on him. His father hadn't just been involved with the Academy. He had been a part of something monumental. But why had his story been erased? Lucas's fingers tightened around the edge of the file as he considered the possibilities. Racism? Institutional corruption? Something worse? With a surge of determination, Lucas gathered the files. He had to know the full truth, and there was only one person who could help him now, Dr. Vargas. But as Lucas stood to leave, he heard the sound of footsteps approaching. Panic surged through him. He couldn't let anyone know he had found these records. Quickly, Lucas stuffed the files into his bag and slipped out of the archives, the thrill of discovery and the fear of being caught racing through his veins. The next morning, Lucas's mind was still racing with thoughts of his father as he entered the Academy's training facility. He had barely slept, his mind turning over the possibilities of what had happened. But there was no time to dwell. Today was another team exercise, and Adrian was already waiting, a smug grin on his face. "Hey, Oliveira," Adrian called out, his voice cutting through the buzz of the other students. "Looks like you're still here. Thought you'd have packed up by now." Lucas ignored him, focusing on the task ahead. But Adrian wasn't one to let things go. As they began the exercise, a complex teamwork drill that involved navigating a mock space environment, Adrian's provocations grew bolder. "You know, some people just aren't cut out for this," Adrian said, deliberately bumping into Lucas during a critical moment. "Especially people who think they can ride on their hard luck stories." Lucas gritted his teeth, refusing to rise to the bait. He couldn't afford to get distracted. But Adrian's next words cut deeper. "Maybe you should just go back to where you came from. No one here cares about your sob story." Something snapped inside Lucas. Before he could stop himself, he turned sharply, his voice low and steady. "You don't know anything about me or where I come from." Adrian's eyes gleamed with satisfaction at getting a reaction. "Oh, I know enough." You're just a charity case, and sooner or later, everyone's going to see that. For a moment, Lucas considered throwing a punch, but then he remembered the files in his bag, the truth he was still uncovering. His fight wasn't with Adrian. Not yet. You'll see, Lucas said, his voice calm but filled with conviction. Soon enough, you'll see. That evening, Lucas knocked on the door of Dr. Vargas's office, his heart pounding in his chest. He had debated whether or not to approach him, but something in his gut told him that Vargas held the key to understanding his father's past. Come in, Vargas's voice called from inside. Lucas stepped into the office, the files clutched tightly in his hands. Dr. Vargas sat behind his desk, his sharp eyes immediately locking onto the papers Lucas was holding. What's this about, Oliveira? Vargas asked, his tone neutral but curious. Without a word, Lucas placed the files on the desk. My father, he said simply. Vargas's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He reached for the files, flipping through them in silence. Minutes passed, and the tension in the room grew heavier with each turn of the page. Finally, Vargas set the papers down and leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. I was wondering when you'd find this. Lucas's breath caught in his throat. You knew? Vargas nodded, his gaze distant. Your father was one of the best. Brilliant, driven, but he wasn't treated fairly. None of us were. He paused, as if weighing his next words carefully. There was a mission. It was groundbreaking, but things went wrong. And your father, he became a scapegoat. They erased him, buried his contributions to protect themselves. Lucas's mind reeled. But why? Why would they do that? Racism, institutional corruption. It was easier for them to place the blame on someone like him, Vargas said bitterly. And he hesitated, his voice softening. I didn't do enough to stop it. Lucas felt the weight of those words settle heavily on his shoulders. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Vargas looked at him with something like regret in his eyes. I thought it was better if you didn't know. I thought it would make things easier for you. But maybe I was wrong. Lucas clenched his fists, anger and sadness swirling inside him. I have to set this right. I have to clear his name. Vargas nodded, his expression serious. You will. But it won't be easy. In the days that followed, Lucas found himself consumed by the truth about his father. He spent every spare moment in the library, poring over old records, piecing together the story that had been hidden from him for so long. Each new discovery only fueled his determination to restore his father's legacy. But as Lucas delved deeper into his quest, he began to isolate himself from the other students. Even Emily, who had always been a source of comfort, noticed the change. You're shutting everyone out, Lucas, Emily said one afternoon as they sat in the cafeteria. You're barely talking to anyone anymore. Lucas stared down at his food, his mind elsewhere. I'm just trying to figure things out. There's a lot going on. I get that, Emily said, her voice gentle, but you don't have to do this alone. You can talk to me. For a moment, Lucas considered telling her everything, the files, the truth about his father, but something held him back. He didn't want to drag her into the mess he was uncovering. I'm fine, Emily, he said, offering her a small, forced smile. Really? She didn't look convinced, but she didn't press the issue. Just don't lose yourself in all of this, okay? Lucas nodded, though deep down, he wasn't sure if he could keep that promise. Late one night, Lucas and Dr. Vargas stood in the cold, sterile halls of the Space Research Institute's archives. It had taken weeks of digging, but they had finally found it, the definitive evidence that proved his father's role in the mission and how he had been wronged. The final piece of the puzzle was a report, signed by key figures at the Academy, acknowledging that mistakes had been made and that Leonardo Oliveira's contributions had been deliberately covered up. Lucas's hands trembled as he read the document, the weight of it almost too much to bear. This is it, Lucas whispered, his voice barely audible. This is the truth. Vargas nodded, his expression grim. Now you have the proof. But the question is, what are you going to do with it? Lucas looked at him, the fire of determination burning in his eyes. I'm going to set things right. I'm going to make sure everyone knows who my father was and what he did. Vargas placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder. then you'd better be ready for what comes next. Because once you bring this to light, there's no going back. Lucas nodded. He was ready. The Academy Training Center buzzed with tension as the cadets prepared for one of their toughest challenges yet, a physically and mentally grueling test designed to push them beyond their limits. Lucas stood among his peers, his mind focused, his muscles already taut from the weeks of relentless training. Today, he had more on the line than just finishing at the top. This was about proving his worth, not just to the Academy, but to his father's memory. As the test began, Lucas ran through the first obstacle, a high-intensity endurance course. His legs burned, his breath coming in sharp gasps, but he pressed forward, ignoring the pain. Adrian Price, of course, was right beside him, sneering as he passed Lucas. "Better keep up, Oliveira," Adrian taunted, his voice cutting through the exhaustion like a blade. "Wouldn't want to fall behind." Lucas ignored him, digging deeper into his reserves of strength. This wasn't about beating Adrian. It was about surviving. As the final stretch of the test approached, Lucas's body screamed for rest, but he refused to slow down. He crossed the finish line, collapsing to his knees, gasping for air. Around him, other cadets finished, some looking worse off than Lucas, others smugly victorious. But in Lucas's mind, there was no doubt. He had pushed himself to the limit, and he had endured. Later that afternoon, after barely recovering from the morning's test, the cadets gathered for the final team exercise of the day. This was a test of strategy, cooperation, and endurance, all under the pressure of simulated space conditions. Lucas found himself paired with Adrian, an outcome he had dreaded. As they worked through the exercise, it became clear that Adrian had a plan. Subtle at first, Adrian began making deliberate errors, minor miscalculations in their trajectory, wrong calls during critical moments. It was sabotage, plain and simple, but done in such a way that the instructors might not notice. At first, Lucas tried to compensate for Adrian's mistakes, quietly adjusting for the errors. But as the exercise wore on, Adrian's sabotage became more blatant. At one point, as they maneuvered through a narrow corridor, Adrian deliberately caused Lucas to stumble, sending their entire simulation off course. "Oops," Adrian said with a smirk. "Guess you weren't paying attention." Lucas's frustration boiled over, but he knew better than to retaliate. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He couldn't afford to let Adrian ruin this for him. With sheer determination, Lucas corrected their course and managed to bring the simulation to a successful conclusion, despite Adrian's best efforts to derail it. When the exercise ended, Lucas's hands shook with the effort it had taken to stay focused. But as they exited the simulation chamber, a few of the instructors exchanged glances, their expressions thoughtful. Lucas couldn't help but wonder if they had seen through Adrian's ploy. That evening, Lucas found himself sitting outside the Academy's courtyard, trying to shake off the day's frustration. He had given everything he had, but it still felt like Adrian had the upper hand. No matter how hard Lucas tried, Adrian always found a way to undermine him. Emily appeared at his side, her auburn hair catching the last rays of the setting sun. She sat down quietly, her eyes scanning Lucas's face. "You've been distant lately," she said softly. "What's going on?" Lucas hesitated. He had been carrying the weight of his father's legacy, the discoveries he had uncovered with Dr. Vargas, and the constant battle with Adrian. It was a lot to hold inside, but he wasn't sure how much he could share. "It's just everything," Lucas finally said, his voice low. "The training, the pressure, Adrian. It's all getting to me." Emily placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him. "You don't have to carry it all alone, you know. I'm here. You can talk to me." For a moment, Lucas considered telling her about the files, the truth about his father, but something stopped him. He didn't want to drag her into the mess he was trying to untangle. "I know," Lucas said, forcing a small smile. "I'll be okay. I just need to keep pushing." Emily frowned, clearly unconvinced, but she didn't press the issue. "Just don't let Adrian get under your skin. You're better than him, Lucas. Don't forget that." Lucas nodded, her words comforting but not entirely lifting the weight on his shoulders. The next day, Lucas met with Dr. Vargas in his office, his mind still racing with thoughts of the past few days. The discoveries about his father had shaken him to his core, but he needed answers. Answers that only Vargas could provide. Dr. Vargas sat behind his desk, his hands clasped together, his eyes shadowed by years of regret. "I suppose you want to know the full truth," he said quietly. Lucas nodded, his heart pounding. "I need to understand. Why was my father's legacy erased?" Vargas leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant. "Your father was part of a groundbreaking mission, a mission that could have changed the course of space exploration. But things went wrong. There were mistakes, miscalculations, and instead of owning up to them, the Academy's leadership chose to scapegoat your father." Lucas's breath caught in his throat. "But why him?" "Because he was different," Vargas said bitterly. "Because it was easier for them to place the blame on someone who didn't come from privilege, someone who they thought wouldn't fight back." Lucas's hands clenched into fists. "And you? You knew this the whole time?" Vargas looked away, his voice filled with regret. "I knew, but I didn't do enough to stop it. I let them bury the truth, and for that, I've lived with the guilt every day since." Lucas stood, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. "I'm not going to let them get away with it. I'm going to set things right." Vargas met his gaze, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "I believe you will, Lucas. But you need to be careful. Once you bring this to light, there will be consequences." Lucas nodded, his resolve solidifying. He didn't care about the consequences. His father's name would be restored, no matter what it took. That night, back in his dorm room, Lucas sat at his desk, staring at the photograph of his father. Everything he had learned over the past weeks had led him to this moment. He could no longer ignore the truth. His father had been wronged, and it was up to Lucas to clear his name. But he also had to balance his personal mission with his dream of becoming an astronaut. If he let his anger consume him, he risked losing everything he had worked for. He couldn't afford to let that happen. Taking a deep breath, Lucas made a decision. He would confront the Academy's leadership, but he would do it on his terms. He wouldn't let his father's legacy be buried any longer, but he also wouldn't let it destroy his own future. With renewed determination, Lucas picked up his training manual and began to study. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but he was ready for them. He had to be. As the night wore on, Lucas felt a sense of calm settle over him. He was finally on the path to restoring his father's legacy, and for the first time in weeks, he felt like he had a clear direction. Tomorrow, he would face whatever came next, with his father's memory guiding him every step of the way. The atmosphere at Vanguard Space Academy was electric with anticipation. It was the day of the final challenge, a high-pressure simulated space mission. This was what the cadets had been training for, and for Lucas, it was more than just another test. It was the culmination of everything he had endured. The prejudice, the sabotage, the emotional weight of his father's legacy. Today, he would prove that he not only belonged here, but that he was among the best. Lucas entered the simulation chamber, feeling the weight of his peers' eyes on him. Adrian was there, of course, still smug, still convinced of his superiority. But Lucas pushed thoughts of Adrian aside. This wasn't about him. It was about Lucas and what he was capable of. The challenge began, and immediately the simulation threw the cadets into chaos. Lucas's mind raced, his training kicking in as he took control of the situation. The simulated spacecraft encountered technical failures, communication blackouts, and environmental hazards, but Lucas navigated each obstacle with precision. His hands moved fluidly across the controls, his voice steady as he coordinated with his team. As the simulation reached its climax, a critical failure in the spacecraft's life support system, Lucas took charge. His leadership shone through as he calmly directed the crew, solving the crisis with a combination of quick thinking and technical expertise. When the simulation finally ended, Lucas was drenched in sweat, but a sense of accomplishment surged through him. He had done it. He had not only passed the test, he had excelled. As the cadets exited the simulation chamber, Adrian's frustration was palpable. He had struggled throughout the challenge, making costly errors that had nearly jeopardized the team's success. Lucas had stepped in more than once to correct Adrian's mistakes, but now it was clear that Adrian's reign of superiority was crumbling. While Lucas received quiet nods of respect from a few cadets, Adrian couldn't contain his anger any longer. "You think you've won?" Adrian spat, his voice low but venomous. You got lucky. That's all. Lucas turned to face him, his expression calm. It wasn't luck, Adrian. It was skill, and you know it. Adrian's fists clenched at his sides, but before he could respond, one of the academy instructors approached. Price, I need a word with you. Adrian's face paled. It didn't take long for word to spread that Adrian's repeated attempts to sabotage Lucas during the simulation had been noticed. By the end of the day, Adrian had been expelled from the academy, his arrogance and underhanded tactics finally catching up to him. Lucas watched as Adrian left, a mix of emotions swirling inside him. He had spent so much time battling Adrian's prejudice and cruelty, but now that his rival was gone, Lucas felt only a sense of closure. Adrian had been his biggest obstacle at the academy, but he was no longer a threat. Lucas had overcome him, and in doing so, he had proven something to himself. Later that evening, Lucas found Emily waiting for him outside the academy's gardens. She smiled as he approached, her eyes bright with pride. I heard what happened. You did it, Lucas. Lucas exhaled, the tension of the day slowly easing from his shoulders. Yeah, I did. Emily took his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. I knew you could. Adrian never stood a chance. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of everything Lucas had endured finally starting to lift. He had fought hard, not just against Adrian, but against the doubts that had plagued him since the moment he arrived at the academy. I couldn't have done it without you, Lucas admitted, his voice quiet but sincere. You've been there for me since the beginning. Emily smiled softly, her hand still in his. And I'll be here until the end. You're going to do great things, Lucas. As they stood together, Lucas felt something shift between them. The bond they had formed over the months had grown stronger, and now, with the final challenge behind them, Lucas felt like he was finally ready to move forward, with Emily by his side. The next day, Lucas met with Dr. Vargas in his office. The tension between them had eased in recent weeks, but Lucas still had one more request. He needed Dr. Vargas to take the evidence they had uncovered about his father to the authorities. Dr. Vargas sat behind his desk, his expression thoughtful as Lucas handed him the final pieces of documentation. You're sure you want to do this? Vargas asked, his voice measured. I have to, Lucas replied. This isn't just about me. It's about setting things right for my father. He deserves to have his legacy restored. Vargas nodded slowly, understanding the weight of Lucas's decision. I'll take it to the board. I can't promise they'll act quickly, but with this evidence, they won't be able to ignore it. Lucas felt a swell of gratitude toward the man who had become more than just a mentor. Thank you. For everything. Vargas smiled faintly, a rare expression on his usually stoic face. You've earned this, Lucas. Your father would be proud. With that, Dr. Vargas promised to take the evidence to the Academy's leadership, ensuring that the truth about Lucas's father would finally come to light. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental to Lucas. For the first time in his life, Lucas felt a sense of peace. His father's name would be restored, and Lucas had carved out his own path, one that honored his family's legacy while forging his own destiny. The day of Lucas's first space mission had finally arrived. The Space Research Institute buzzed with excitement as the final preparations were made. Lucas stood at the edge of the launch site, gazing up at the spacecraft that would carry him beyond the atmosphere. It was the moment he had dreamed of his entire life. Anna, his mother, stood beside him, her eyes filled with pride and tears. You did it, meu filho, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Lucas smiled, the weight of everything he had fought for finally culminating in this moment. I couldn't have done it without you, May. They embraced tightly, and as Lucas pulled back, he saw the pride in his mother's eyes, the pride of a woman who had sacrificed everything to give her son a chance at his dreams. You're going to the stars, Anna said softly, her voice filled with wonder. Lucas nodded, his heart swelling with emotion. And I'm taking you with me, just like I promised. With one last look at his mother, Lucas turned and made his way toward the spacecraft. The roar of the engines filled the air, and as he boarded, Lucas felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had not only achieved his dream, but he had honored the promise he had made so long ago. As the countdown began, Lucas looked out of the small window beside him, seeing the vast expanse of the sky. And as the spacecraft lifted off, he felt the weight of the world fall away. He was finally going to the stars, just as he had always dreamed.